Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today's Husting. I'm Rachel and I'm your chair for today. I'm a disability advocate and a member of SCAD's End Social Care Disgrace steering group. Just before we start, a few housekeeping rules. This event is being recorded and you will be asked to agree. For those of you not comfortable with having your video on, you are welcome to turn it off. Please mute if you are not speaking. The chat will be disabled while speakers are speaking and opened up for questions later. Closed captions are available. When we open up to take questions following all speakers, I will also be asking attendees to keep their questions to about 3 minutes, so as many people as possible can get to speak. You'll do that by raising your hand, either electronic or otherwise, once the speakers have finished. So what is End Social Care Disgrace? End Social Care Disgrace is a sister organisation to keep our NHS public who campaign for a national care support and independent living service. We are represented by a broad range of disabled and older people's organisations, family carers, care and support workers, health campaigners, trade unions and TUCs. We are non-party political. We campaign to bring the state of social care into the spotlight and to build a powerful voice for radical and urgent change. End Social Care Disgrace calls for the next government to provide a national care and independent living service that is publicly funded, publicly provided, free at the point of use, not for profit, nationally mandated but co-produced with users from diverse backgrounds and delivered locally, underpinned by staff whose pay and conditions reflect their true value and skills with a minimum £15 an hour. Designed to meet the needs of informal carers and adopting into English law articles from the UN Convention of Rights of Disabled People that establish choice and control, dignity and respect. I would now like to introduce our first speaker. John MacDonald is a former Shadow Chancellor and the Labour Party candidate for Hayes and Harlington. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm watching myself on the screen and I look incredibly red, and it's because I've been canvassing in the sun for the last 4 weeks, and whatever factor I put on my face doesn't seem to work. There's lots of faces I recognise, lots of individuals I recognise from the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. Also, can I also say with me is my colleague Jackie Connor, who some of you will know, who's done a lot of work around the unpaid carers group. Just so people know my background, I'm a Labour MP. I'm not the official spokesperson for the Labour Party on social care or these issues. What I will do is I'll explain what's in the Labour manifesto, but I'll also give my views on what's needed, because to be frank, the discussion that we need to have is what we do after the general election now, not just from the Labour Party, but Pallavi is here on a cross-party basis and what we do together about shaping the future of social care in this country, because of I think the crisis that it's in and the immense harm that's been meted out to people as a result of the lack of a social care system that enables people to live a life in dignity. My background is that I've been a Labour MP for...
Right, it's John MacDonald on here.
Okay. I've been a Labour MP since 97. Shadow Chancellor, yes, for a period 2015 to 2020. And during that period, took an interest in the development of social care, in particular, development of a national care service. When I stood down, we left a body of work for the Labour Party to do if it ever gets into government, and it looks as though from the polls that will be a Labour government after the general election on the 4th of July. So it's now about what happens then. The unpaid carers group that I've chaired, of which there are quite a few members here, we did a paper which set out, I think, the immediate concerns that people had about the lack of debate and discussion, particularly around unpaid carers and how the pressures that they were under, I think that not just the lack of services to support them, but also often the abject poverty in which many of them have been thrust as a result of lack of financial support. So we set out a whole range of changes that we wanted to see. First of all was the recognition of carers overall and about the need for respect, both for those who provide the care, but also for those who are receiving care too. It was about income, and so therefore our view was that we need to dramatically increase carers allowance, but more importantly, recognise the role that carers play. So not looking on carers allowance as a benefit, but actually as recognise it should be a wage for the work that people do, and it should be based upon a real living wage. And for that reason, we were campaigning for support as a right and the end of means testing. We also tried to explain to a whole range of MPs about the problems that people, carers encounter, particularly with regard to the way they're treated by often health and local authority staff, and the need for those staff to be properly trained so that they can provide the support that's needed. We also, everyone explained the fight that they had, the struggle that they had to fight their way through a complex system, and therefore the need for professional support, legal advice and advocacy to help them through that system. And then we set out the need, some immediate practical examples of what could help people, extending respite care. We talked about befriending schemes, and we came back down to the simple fact that actually, having gone through a cost of living crisis now, there was a desperate need for action by an incoming government. So they're the arguments that we've been campaigning on, and we've been campaigning with other organisations like DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, and others to try and get this up the agenda. I have to say the debate, I just say this objectively, and even though I'm a candidate in the election, I just say this objectively. I think the debate and the campaigns for the general election so far has neglected social care. People seem to avoid the debate itself. I think maybe because they see it as too big a problem, but actually it's a problem that has to be solved. And the sooner we address the real issues, the sooner we'll be able to solve those problems. Within the Labour manifesto, what we've got there is a commitment. There's an acceptance of a commitment that what any state should be providing is that people should live their lives independently. They should have a prosperous and fulfilling life. And there's an acknowledgement that social care is vital to achieving that. So there's a need for reform. They put forward in the manifesto that they will undertake, the Labour government, incoming Labour government, will undertake a programme of reforms to create a national care service underpinned by national standards, delivering consistency of care across the country. And it's based upon the principle that that care should be home first, so providing care to keep people in their homes, to live independently for as long as possible. And they're arguing that the new standards will be introduced to ensure there's high quality care and ongoing sustainability, and that the care will be developed in local partnerships between the NHS, social care discussions. And those partnerships will also include employers, workers, trade unions and the government to establish fair pay across the whole social care sector in particular. And this is about sectoral collective bargaining that we used to have in this country and that we should develop again. And there's a commitment to guaranteeing the rights of those in residential care to see their families, proper regulation of social care and the role of social care workers. So that's set out in very briefly in the manifesto. All manifestos are relatively brief, but the reality is, if there is an incoming Labour government, as the polls predict, we've got to, as those of us who are interested in social care, but so carers themselves in particular, we've got to be at the forefront of demanding that carers have a role in the production of that national care strategy. And therefore, I think this needs a cross-party campaign, and I'm pleased that Pallavi is here. And I think on many of these issues, we can speak with one voice. I want to see the end of poverty for the unpaid carers, and that means a proper wage for not just carers allowance, but a proper wage for those carers so that it lifts people out of poverty. I do want to see a proper level of investment in social care overall. And it does mean I support the principles around the end social care disgrace, that it should be publicly funded and it should be publicly provided. And that there should be everything that we do from here on in with regard to social care, whether it's for unpaid carers or whether it's for residential care or other forms of support, it should be co-produced. So that's the service users, those involved in the development of care, as well as the professionals. And it should always be democratically accountable. So the potential of a change of government now, potentially a Labour government, is although they've set out a limited amount of statements within the manifesto itself, we've got to drive home the detail of that. And we've got to also make sure it's done at speed and at pace, because people are suffering now. What I've been impressed with is the absolute dedication of people, both in terms of unpaid carers, but also those working within the social care sector. But what also I've been almost traumatized by, to be honest, at times in the discussions that we've had, is the suffering that people go through, the stress that they're under, and the impact it's having on people's lives. And so therefore, somehow, and it will be as a result of joint campaigning, I think, somehow we've got to get this up the agenda. I think it's absolutely key. If we want to claim to live in a civilized society, social care in all its different aspects has got to be possibly the number one priority for an incoming government. There'll be arguments about cost, and we keep reminding people about the scale of social care that there is in this country. 162 billion is saved as a result of the care that's undertaken voluntarily by unpaid carers. And the cost of not having a proper care system means also that large numbers of people who could work aren't able to work because they have the time, because they're undertaking care within their own families. So I don't think it is a cost. It's not a cost to the community or to the economy. It's a cost saving if we can get a national care service in place and if we can give the support to the unpaid carers that they need. So I think what I'm saying is I'm not happy with the debate so far across the whole campaign for this election. I think we've got a week in which we can start raising more this issue. But more importantly for me is once the election's over, as a group of organisations working across the field, we need to come together to launch, I think, one of the biggest campaigns in all our history is to get this up as the number one item on the political agenda and make sure the resources as well as the policies are in place. But those policies have to be based upon the very ideas that are coming out of the experience of carers themselves and those who've experienced the social care system as it now is. And I think in that way, I say to some of my colleagues, we could be world leaders in this field. We could demonstrate just what social care is all about, and we could do it in a way which I think others could learn from us. Tragically, at the moment, I don't think we're world leaders. I actually think, exactly as has been described by this organisation, social care at the moment and the way people are treated is a disgrace, and we've got to end that disgrace. Rachel, I'll leave it there, and then we can come back with a real discussion, can't we, about how we go forward.
Thank you, John. A good turnout. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Pallavi. She's the Green Party candidate for South West and Norfolk and spokesperson for health and social care and public health. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everyone. It's a delight to be here and to be able to explain gosh, I don't want to be in the spotlight. Do I have to be? Okay. Right. Yeah, as Rachel said, I'm the Green Party health spokesperson, also spokesperson for social care and public health. I hope you can all hear me all right. Yeah, okay. I'm also a GP by profession. I wandered into politics just because I got into such a pit of despair about all the things that were going on and the frustration I felt about how we could do things so much better. And I read somewhere that, political parties like a bus. You take the bus that takes you closest to your destination. For me, that was the Green Party. And I must say, I haven't regretted it. I'm really happy to say that the Green Party has come out with a really good manifesto with regards to care. We've said that we've costed it as well. So, and it's been examined by independent economists and such like. We've said we will put £20 billion into social care. We want to provide free personal care for everyone, because we understand how important it is to live with dignity and just how much people are struggling. As a GP, I see firsthand the effects of the lack of a decent provision of care, you know, the devastating effect it has on people, both informal carers, but I also see the care profession, which is so badly neglected, so undervalued in our society. We have more than 100,000 vacancies in social care. And yet there are people out there looking for jobs. Something isn't right. I know of young people in my area who are on 0 hours contract with their local care homes. They get told to turn up at 8 a.m. the next morning for a shift. They go for their shift, get told, oh, actually, we've got enough staff now, come back at 2:30. That's no way to treat anyone. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's no wonder that caring isn't an attractive profession. You know, we need people to want to go into care and to stay there, for it to be a respectable career, one that pays their bills, one that they feel fulfilled by. The vast majority of people go into care because they like the caring aspect of it. Time and again, I've heard people say, I love my job, but it doesn't pay the bills. Domiciliary care is a whole other thing. The pay that they get literally doesn't cover them for the cost of driving from one house to another and the petrol costs of doing so. Obviously, they're then going to be hurried because they're under strict instructions to spend so many minutes with a person. It's not enough time to do the job properly, you know, to actually provide a sense of care for that person, which is what it's about. So there's a lot that's wrong with care. I've seen it firsthand, and I think it's so easy to fix. But the other side of this, of course, which people do talk about occasionally, is the fact that the lack of care home beds, the lack of caring support in homes is having a devastating effect on the health service. We actually have people who are unable to go home or who are sent home and then have to be readmitted because the support around them is just not there. All these things are easy to fix. And not only are they easy to fix, it's a smart thing to do to fix these things. It gives people a better quality of life. It gives the economy a boost. And it reduces the stress. The sheer mental health burden of this country is partly down to the stress of daily living. And lack of care is a big part of it. So there are so many strands to this and so many ways in which you can benefit. It's like a win-win-win. And, you know, to me, it just feels like a no-brainer to invest in social care. I would completely agree with John's comments about a cross-party approach. I'm not at all tribal about things. You know, I'm in politics to make people's lives better. And I would absolutely support anyone who wanted to do the right thing, whether it was health or social care, or indeed anything else. With care, I think we have a real challenge. We have a very, very timid offer from Labour, who are likely to form the next government. And I think campaigners have their work cut out to make sure that they hold their feet to the fire and that they deliver. The money can be found. We saw through the COVID pandemic, you know, billions of pounds were found. Unfortunately, quite a few billions were wasted. Contracts were given to, you know, friends and cronies of people in power, which is a whole another story. But the point is, money can be found. If governments think that something is important, they will find the money. And rightly so. It's a job of government, you know, to do basic things. And they have a basic duty towards people. And providing care is one of them. It's right up there. We have a population that is definitely getting older, and that's something to celebrate. You know, it's a victory of modern medicine as well as better lifestyles, better public health, that we've got to a point where people are living longer with more complex diseases and so on. And it's a basic minimum duty of government to ensure that all of these people have a good quality of life right till the end. They cannot renege on that. So I would support any attempts to do that. So as I said, we've costed a manifesto. We know the money can be found. All governments tend to waste all sorts of money on different things. So it's a question of priorities, and that's something that we must never tire of reminding them of. I can go into specifics, but maybe I'll stop there and kind of, yeah, leave us more time for discussion, perhaps. That's all right.
Yes, thank you very much. Right, our next speaker is Brian Fisher, who was a retired GP. And he's going to run through the remainder of the manifestos.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, I'm going to summarize the Tory policy, which is the summary they offer in their manifesto, and then I'm going to read out the Lib Dem policy. We've been in touch with the Lib Dems, and they weren't able to send a person, but they have sent a statement. So I'll be reading that out. So first, I'm going to read out the Tory policy, which is: we are committed to supporting a high quality and sustainable social care system, building on our additional investment of up to 8.6 billion over the last 2 years. At the next spending review, we will give local authorities a multi-year funding settlement to support social care, and will take forward the reforms in our People at the Heart of Care white paper. We will attract and retain a high-quality care workforce, make reforms to shape the market for older people's housing, and support unpaid carers. We will implement our planned reforms to cap social care costs from October 2025. So that's the summary of the Tory policy on social care, and this is rather longer. This is from the Lib Dems. Everyone deserves high quality care when they need it. Liberal Democrats want everyone to be able to live independently and with dignity and receive any care they need in their own home wherever possible. Carers, paid and unpaid, young and old, do a remarkable and important job. They deserve far more support, but are too often forgotten and ignored. But social care services in this country are in crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people are waiting for care. Many are stranded in hospital beds because the care isn't in place for them to leave, putting even more strain on the NHS. The Conservatives promised to fix the crisis in our social care system, that no one would have to sell their house to pay for personal care costs, and that they would not raise taxes to do it. They have broken all those promises. We will empower care users and support care workers and the millions of unpaid carers looking after loved ones. We will forge a new consensus on funding to ensure that no one has to sell their home to pay for their personal care. The Liberal Democrats have set out a number of ways to fix social care and deliver the high quality care that people deserve. We are also the first ever party to have a dedicated chapter of care in our manifesto. We will introduce free personal care based on the model introduced by the Liberal Democrats in government in Scotland in 2002, so that provision is based on need, not ability to pay. Create a social care workforce plan, establish a Royal College of Care Workers to improve recognition and career progression, and introduce a higher carers minimum wage. Establish a cross-party commission to forge a long-term agreement on sustainable funding for social care, trialling personal health and social care budgets so that individuals are in control of what care they receive, improve communication standards so carers can support care users to co-produce and monitor care plans, establish an independent living task force to help people live independently in their own homes, create a national care agency to set national minimum standards of care, give unpaid carers a fair deal by increasing carers' allowance and expanding eligibility for it, and stopping pursuing carers for old overpayments, introducing a statutory guarantee of regular respite breaks for unpaid carers, introducing paid carers leave, building on the entitlement to unpaid leave secured by the Liberal Democrats, making caring a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010, and requiring employers to make reasonable adjustments to enable employees with caring responsibilities to provide that care. Introducing a young carers pupil premium as part of an educational guarantee for young carers. increase carers' allowance and expand eligibility for it by raising the amount carers can earn and introducing an earnings taper to end the unfair cliff edge, reducing the number of hours of care per week required, and extending it to carers in full-time education. We'll make careers in social care more attractive and value experienced staff to improve retention by creating a new carers minimum wage, boosting the minimum wage for care workers by £2 an hour as a starting point for improved pay across the sector, creating clear career pathways linked to recommended pay scales, which put an end to the undervaluing of skills in the sector, creating a career ladder to allow flexibility to work across the NHS and social care, allowing staff to gain experience in both, creating a Royal College of Care Workers to represent this skilled workforce, and expanding the NHS digital staff passport to include the care sector. Recruit more staff to the sector with a social care workforce plan, akin to the NHS England workforce plan, which includes ethical international recruitment. Supporting people to age well by establishing a commissioner for older people and aging, rolling out active aging programs and trips and falls assessments for everyone over the age of 75 to prevent falls, avoid unnecessary hospital admissions, and promote healthy aging. Opening fracture liaison services so that osteoporosis patients can get the treatment they need and prevent long-term issues and costs. Support children in kinship care and their family carers by introducing a statutory definition of kinship care, building on the existing pilot to develop a weekly allowance for all kinship carers. And finally, make care experience a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010 to strengthen the rights of people who are in or have been in care. So that's a summary, quite a long summary of the Liberal Democrat policy, and before that, the Tory party policy on social care. Just a final moment just to say that we've been talking about the cost and the investment in social care, just to say that on End Social Care Disgrace website, if you go to resources, you can see our explanation for the affordability of our plans for social care. It is affordable. In fact, it's more expensive not to make the changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for the presentations. I suppose the thing I wanted to pick up on was the cross-party consensus issue, because those of us who've been working on social care for a while, in fact, to be fair, John said there'd been very little coverage of social care. I have to say, maybe my experience in political campaign is not so long, but I just feel that for once it's actually got onto the political agenda. There do seem to be debates about it, and not solely as a problem for the NHS. But the question is, will that persist post-election? The Labour Party says that they want to build a consensus about longer term reform. We hear from the Greens now they agree with consensus. Liberal Democrats want to establish a cross-party commission. Even Reform apparently wants to create a royal commission, but I think that may be to put it on the long finger, which I definitely wouldn't be happy about. So just really from the politicians, how do we make sure that post-election this commitment to cross-party working, because it will only work if there's sort of serious examination of these problems and it doesn't just become a political football as it has previously. So thanks very much for any help you can give us.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if John wanted to answer that first.
So I thought we were taking 3 questions at once.
Oh, I see. All right, yeah.
I can come back on that, Maggie, if you want. Maybe I want too much in the election debate in terms of this issue. I don't think it has really got. I don't think there has been enough coverage on it on like other issues. We've seen too much of this election campaign is a bit of a disaster in terms of just political tittle tattle and all the rest. Anyway, the strategy I think we need to understand is that the nearer you get to an election on an issue like this, the more chance there is of consensus breaking down and not getting a deal. That means I think we've got to have a strategy which goes in very early on the incoming government to get this issue discussed, and for those feelers to be put out amongst the other political parties so that we can come together to start the work immediately. If it's delayed, literally you get past the first year and then you're in the second year and then you're in the run up to the next general election, and that's when political parties fall out. Basically, they start playing, it becomes a political football again. So what we've got to do is get as many organizations as possible across the whole piece to try and get the incoming government to host the first stage of a discussion with all the other political parties. There's not an awful lot, if you look at what has been said today, there's not an awful lot of disagreement on the basics. In fact, the Lib Dem policy that was listed, it's almost like the manifesto I wrote in 17 and 19, which is great. So we've got to build it. There are some points of principle difference, to be honest, and I'm more of a person who believes in public provision than private provision, but you can work around that. So I think what we've got to do is impress upon the incoming government, start the discussions off, bring all the parties in immediately, start the discussions off, get the agenda of issues, identify those ones that you can agree upon and work up in more detail, identify those ones where there might be elements of disagreement and try and hone that down. And if we can get that done within the first 6 months, those discussions, I think there's a real opportunity of getting some agreement. I speak from a Labour perspective, and I try and be as objective as possible. When Labour goes into government, they've set out their first priorities, their first steps. It hasn't included social care. It's more about health and education and other. Fine. But after the first year, those first steps will have settled down. And then after the first year, Labour's got to start delivering. Otherwise, there will be real disillusionment, to be honest. And I'm worried about that disillusionment. We could go the way of Germany, France, and Italy, because the far right will then exploit that disillusionment. So therefore, I think the way in which this policy can be developed, the incoming government bringing people together, 6 months of fairly intensive discussions, and then it becomes the second wave of Labour Party policy, if you like, for implementation. And I think we could get consensus on quite a bit of this. I can have rows with people about venture capitalists owning the social care system. I'm happy with that. But actually, that can come at a later stage. What I find interesting is most of the political parties, apart from the Conservatives on this, are all moving towards, with regard to staffing, to the point that Pallavi made, is a respect agenda, but then enables people, Pallavi, you fill those vacancies by paying people a proper wage and respecting the role that they play. That's the sectoral collective bargaining that I'm advocating, because I want a trade union role in there. Whereas on the Liberals, they're coming forward with their own proposals on that, but will meet the same objectives to a certain extent. So that's my view on just strategically and tactically how we have to go about it.
Thank you, John. Dr. Pallavi, did you want to come back in?
No, I have nothing to disagree with on there. I think Greens have a very strong manifesto commitment on social care, and we would want, to collaborate on bringing, care as close to that as possible. Really, that's our goal. So yeah.
And can I also say what Pallavi said about the money as well? We should not allow anyone to tell us the money isn't there. It is there. We're 6th richest country in the world. If we can't look after those in need in our country, we're not a civilized country. So the money is there, and we can even agree where we can find that on taxation purposes in terms of the scale that's needed. I think that can be one of those discussions that will come in the early stages, and one where we can hammer out agreement.
Thank you, John. Charlie, do you want to come in now, please?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Can
Okay,
anyone?
good.
No, I'm struggling to hear. There's a background noise. I think there's a few people who are off mute who are not speaking.
I'll try and speak up and slowly. Yeah, so I've written my question down because I think that'll be easier. In 1948, Nye Bevan set up the NHS with the guiding principle that professionals would be free to do their jobs unhindered by resource implications, and that the politician's job would be to do their best to secure the resources needed. Would you agree, and this is to both people, John and Pallavi, would you agree that any national care and independent living service, whatever it's called, should be founded on that same principle? This would mean a complete U-turn on the current resource-led model, and finally revealing the gap between needs and resources, which has always been hidden since the founding of any kind of social care, and leaves us with no idea about how much money is actually needed. So any kind of projected budgets for social care right now, they will not be accurate because nobody knows how much is actually needed and what is needed. The NHS was founded with no new doctors or nurses. A fundamental and radical change in social care isn't dependent on waiting for more funding. It's dependent on professional integrity and political ambition and will.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll just take Alex next, and then we can put questions to John and Pallavi.
Thank you very much. I am a disabled person who has been using PAs for 20 years. And it's one of my concerns from what I've heard today. Some really, really interesting, very important things, important ideas and everything. But I've heard very little about the role of people with lived experience and how they should really be part of the driving force and the decision making and the policy and all of this. And what I'm very concerned about is that this will get swallowed up by trade union discussion, by employment law discussion, by medicalization of the whole situation, rather than a real understanding of independent living and what that means to the people who use the social care system. So how will you ensure that actually people with lived experience, people who use PAs, PA employers, don't get swallowed up by all the arguments to do with trade unions, linking it in with the NHS, making things so professionalized that actually we as PA users do not recognize that we have independence, respect and dignity in the way that we choose to wish to live our lives.
Thank you, Alex. And Claire, would you like to come in now?
Thank you. Well, just from what Alex was just saying, we are very worried that, as described in the Labour manifesto, the National Care Service, with the convergence of NHS and social services, is just going to be the merger of two enormous bureaucracies who deliberately deprived us during the pandemic of means of survival. So that is really, really worrying. And there's not enough discussion that the military budget could pay for everyone's needs. Both Sunak and Starmer have pledged at least £75 billion increase, and Starmer went to BAE Systems in Scotland, I believe, which is implicated in supplying fighter jets bombing Gaza. So there's not enough discussion of that. And we support a care income for mothers and other carers across caring for children, caring for people and planet and animals and wildlife, all of those socially worthwhile activities, as well as recognising family carers. It's kind of a bit of a bigger ask than a living wage, although that is part of it. And then in relation to Dr. Devulapalli, in relation to Bristol, Bristol has now got a Green majority council, and one of the issues in Bristol was the Labour pushing people into care homes if their home care package was too expensive. And we want that reversed in Bristol and everywhere else. And but they're saying that it's going to be business as usual. And the other thing is that placements of children in privatised care homes in Bristol amounted to more than £101 million. And the Greens are still pledging increasing spending on child protection, which is going to these awful places, similar to the Life School in the Wirral, where the young people were being abused. That was costing the council £50,000 a year per placement. Is that the kind of spending that is going to continue? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. John, would you like to address some first?
Okay, on Charlie's point, on the principles, the Nye-Bevan principles upon which the NHS was founded, I fully support that approach and the principles of it. Interestingly enough, I went to see the play Nye. Those principles were reiterated in that play. I had people around me in tears. It was quite remarkable, and it was quite moving to see people being moved by that. And therefore, you get the feel that people agree with those principles. There's support out there for them, and everyone commends the NHS as, I believe it's a socialist principles, but everyone commends the NHS as the sort of jewel in the crown of the Attlee government, and it's survived as long as it has because people appreciate it so much, despite all the batterings that it's had. But it's true that Nye-Bevan, the failure was to include social care in that stage of reform. It was planned that the next wave of policy in the Labour government, if it stayed in power, would have been around social care, and it would have been on those same principles. And it was on the basis that, you know, you create the wealth in our country, and that wealth should be dedicated, therefore, to ensuring that everyone has a decent quality of life. And the welfare state, the whole point was to have a welfare state net so that when you needed it, you will have that support. And it didn't matter. The cost issue wasn't a matter. Is that if the money needed to be found, it would be found. It was simple as that, basically. And that's my view today. And I think they're the same principles. It comes on, actually, I'll just skip over to Claire a minute. Claire mentioned in terms of defence budget that the government committed to finding an additional 75 billion. There was no evidence at all that it could find that money. It just made that announcement. So therefore it committed to finding it. So what they came up with was that they'd sacked 95,000 civil servants to somehow find that money. It just gave an indication that when governments, political parties have a priority, they'll find the resources. They might not practically find them, but they will cover their tracks in terms of actually doing it. And it was an example that sometimes we fail to recognize just the resources that are available to us if we had a fair taxation system and if we had an economy that was invested in over time and therefore growing. We can afford a proper social care system. No one should be allowed to argue they didn't. With regard to Alex, I work on the basis, I was one of those who was at the founding conference of Disabled People Against the Cuts. And at that point, if you remember, we made that statement of principle. Nothing about us without us. And that's got to be the principle upon which we discuss. There's all sorts of fancy language that we use as well about co-production and that sort of thing. But that's the basic principle, because if it isn't the people engaged in social care, receiving or delivering as unpaid carers, etc., we'll never understand properly what people need and what they're going through. So everything we say, we need to re-chant that principle all the time. One way of ensuring things are protected is to ensure that there's a legal right to have a voice, but also a legal duty for people to respond in that way. And I have to say also, some of us have been campaigning, some of the in the screens here, we've been campaigning also for a legal responsibility of candor. So when people are questioned, they have to speak the truth, and they're legally liable if they don't. Because what's happened in social care in a number of instances where things have gone wrong, there hasn't been openness, transparency, or candor. And as a result of that, we've found cover-ups and abuse going on. So I think the duty of candor is absolutely important. Briefly on medicalisation, I won't go on too long. I hosted a conference 7 years ago in the House of Commons. It was on behalf of clinical psychologists and others, and that was to identify the medicalisation that was going on of individual conditions. And the reason that those professionals were kicking off about it is because the pharmaceutical companies, particularly the American pharmaceutical companies, were identifying a condition, medicalising it, and then selling a drug for it. And what we've got to do is recognise that's the pressure that big pharma will place upon our system continuously. Just on Claire's point, 2 points I want to raise on that. One is one of the campaigns that Win Visible and Wages for Housework and others have campaigned for is a recognition of the role that carers and others play, but that should be recognised economically. Now, some countries build it into their calculation of GDP and recognise it constitutionally. We should do that here as well, so that the debate around care is a recognition there's an economic debate here. An economic contribution that's made by carers is so significant. Final point from me, Claire raised the issue of children in care. I worked for 13 years with a small unit family children's home run by the local authority. And it was to prepare children for fostering, etc. And to be frank, it was not brilliant, but it worked. It worked pretty well. And I know lots of the children we brought up are in my local community now, so they've come through it. And we were preventing children being rotated through different care homes, foster breakdowns and all the rest of it. That's all been privatised now. And if you look at the research that's gone on, huge profits are being made in relation to childcare at the moment, in relation to children's homes in particular. It's become a national scandal, and the standards of care are poor. Privatisation has made the money that's invested in it, large amounts of it are going into profiteering rather than actually into provision of care. And I think it's one of those scandals that we need to expose more and address. And again, as Claire has said, often it's local authorities taking decisions on a financial basis, but actually it doesn't save money, and it causes immense hardship for those children as well because of neglect in some of these homes.
Thank you, John. Pavli, would you like to come in on that?
Sure, yeah. I just want to say the first about Charlie's point about a national care service. I think that's the direction of travel of the Green Party, but we haven't said that explicitly in the manifesto, partly because it's in such dire straits that, I don't know, there was a little fear that a wholesale reorganization would take a very long time. And we thought we would work with the system as it is, but work to actually, from the carer's point of view and from users' point of view, to make it work for both of them. Having a national care qualification would go a long way towards creating that assurance and giving carers that respectability and career pathway that is so badly needed. So I think if we did that, that would be an enormous win, and we would see an immediate transformation of care in the country. I really do believe that that will work wonders. Greens are very keen to ensure that care becomes a valued profession. So that's going to be our direction of travel. Moving to Alex's point, we very much want to include people with lived experience in our policy making. We're actually desperately looking for people to join the policy working group in the Green Party because we want to revise our current care policy in the actual policy. I'm not talking about the manifesto here. So any help would be most welcome. We absolutely agree that people who actually either using it or are providing the care should be involved in any decisions about them. We are very, very keen that people should be able to get personal care free at the point of use. And this has already been trialed in Scotland, so there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be successful. And it will give people back a measure of control and independence in their daily lives, which is so important. Claire, I've listened to you as well about just the fear that decisions will be made. Elected Greens will campaign for Gloria's Law, which is a law which gives every single person the right to at least one essential care supporter. And this could be a person who's important to them, a relative or a friend, when they're using health or care services. And I think this is so important to have another person advocate for you in a time of need when, you know, we might not be at our best. The point about Bristol, I think this was, I can't remember who, was it Alex who talked about it? I'm not sure. But yeah, I will look into that. I'm not aware of the detail of Bristol, but I think Greens would definitely not want to make choices on the basis of pure finances. I know that councils have been very constrained, but as you say, it costs money either way, and we would definitely want to put money in where it benefits people the most and gives them the most ability for, you know, to live lives with dignity, to ensure their privacy and that their personal interests and personal needs are taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Paul was next. Paul Ridley is still around.
Yep, still here. 2 or 3 points. Firstly, I think carers have been forgotten for so many years now. I mean, when was the last time you heard a carer getting nominated in the honours list for 40 years of service or more for caring, like some of the celebrities do in their various jobs? But I think a lot of it also comes with social care where it's fallen, is we've got no one regulating them. The ombudsman couldn't investigate them and say, oh, blah, blah, blah. But the LAs do not have to do what they say. If you can't get a solicitor or you can't afford to go to court, the ombudsman is the only route. The CQC will send it back to the council or to education or health. And the council and the staff in social care know this. And I think until you start to sort of like having a commission, an independent commission, a bit like the police complaints commission being set up. I mean, I was told the other day, talking to someone in the LGO, they turn more cases away from investigation and are often threatened with JRs to just even look at them. And, you know, I think the councils know this. And until they start being held accountable for, and the LAs and the health authorities, then they're going to carry on doing it. And we need to change that at the same time. And as I say, if anyone knows the question of the last carer, just for sole caring purposes, that got an MBE without doing any campaign work or anything, then please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just going to bring Brian back in now because he's been monitoring the chat for us, so he's going to share some questions from the chat.
Okay, thanks very much. So Helen Rowlands asks, we need guarantees that the needed care sector wage increase won't be funded by increasing disabled people's care charges. There's no indication from the Labour Party of where the wage increase funding is coming from. The councils and the providers have made clear that they can't cover wage increases without rationing care packages. There's a lot of debate about modern monetary theory, suggesting that basically we can afford whatever we want. And Rona says, I've got two questions. Hammersmith and Fulham and Tower Hamlets has proven it's not essential to charge recipients for their care. What are your thoughts on getting rid of care charging and raising taxes for the highest earners to fund it? The other question is, do you think by strengthening employment rights, you can attract people back into the care profession? There are quite a few others, but I thought I'd pick on those particularly.
Thank you. Would you like to answer that, John?
There's quite a number of a wide range of issues there. I'll try and remember some. Okay. On Paul's point about an independent, it's an independent commissioner, ombudsman, or whatever. I sit on the, up until the election was called, I sat on the select committee to which the parliamentary health ombudsman reports. To be frank, I wasn't over impressed at the way that they dealt with cases and investigated cases. If we were going to go down that path, and I completely understand why people want that, some form of independent commissioner of some sort, we'd have to make sure we're absolutely clear that the role it should play and it will have the resources. Paul mentioned about the independent police complaints system, and again, I've got quite a bit of experience with that with constituents, and it's not ideal, but I can understand why it's a route that we need to explore. But again, if we are going to do that, I go back to the point that was made earlier, that if we're going to go down that route, it does need to be developed by those people who have experience of what social care is all about and what caring is all about. And it's the principle we mentioned before, nothing about us without us. It would have to be designed, I think, with some skill by those people who know the system, experience the system, both as carers and as people being cared for. On the increased funding, we've got to force the debate. Pallavi set out the Green Party's calculation of around 20 billion or whatever. We put in, when I was Shadow Chancellor, I think if I remember rightly, we put in about 8 to 10 billion just to start the process off in terms of building the system. That would have been in place by now, and the second stage would be underway. So it is a fair amount of money, and it's true, local authorities can't cover this cost. The amounts that they're identified as being required, I think if I remember rightly, it was something like 6 billion. They certainly haven't got those resources, and therefore it will have to come from central government. And the way in which central government raises its resources, and this is the debate around modern monetary theory, which if we want to have, we could be here for a few days, okay, but the issue is you can raise resources via taxation or borrowing or printing money, and or all three. Often the argument on MMT is taxation is just used to control the inflation, to be honest. But the only thing that I have a problem with MMT is that because we're not the primary sovereign denomination that's used, we're not the dollar, we are subject to international markets. And I think Liz Truss demonstrated to us what consequences can come of that. But MMT does give us an argument for the way in which you can be more creative about how you fund public services themselves. And again, if we could get a step forward quickly in agreeing, even if we could just get agreement on the scale of funding that's required, we can then have the debate about how that's brought about. And if we can get that discussion in a realistic way, that all the parties agree this is really realistically what's needed, then we can have that discussion about how those resources are found. And that would be a huge breakthrough. I actually do think people out there understand that social care has to be paid for. And I do think people are willing to support a government that will invest in this. I really do. Because just knocking on doors, a lot of people say this as well, I'm knocking on doors at the moment. I'm coming across people who are looking after parents or youngsters who are really struggling. And again, I'm coming across care workers who are living on, I think, poverty wages. And there's I think there's a potential of a huge consensus out there for the sort of radical change that's needed on all of this. Thanks.
Hi,
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll answer in a jumble if that's all right. First of all, yeah, getting rid of care charges, we would totally be in support of it altogether. And improving employment rights for carers is definitely the way forward. As I said, employing people on 0 hours contracts, not giving them the decency of, telling them, what shifts they've got for the coming week, at least, is a complete disgrace. And it's an abuse of the concept of 0 hours contract, which, when it's worked really well, might actually work for some people some of the time. So we would definitely want carers to have proper training, have proper workplace support, have protected hours, and a decent wage. So we want a £15 minimum wage. That's what Greens have been asking for. And we would definitely support that for carers. So that's that. Councils are strapped for cash. Councils are being asked to make sort of spending cuts year on year. And they are struggling to find the money to pay for care which comes within their remit. It's a real problem. And we need to have these conversations. As John said, people are aware, they're not foolish. They know the money's got to be found. And there's a lot of support for a wealth tax, which Greens are supporting. We will tax wealth. And we're talking about people with millions of pounds, not ordinary people, not salaried people. People earning £10 million will have a wealth tax. People earning billions will pay a 2% tax. It's the sort of money that you wouldn't even notice whether you had it or not, because they've got that much money. It's a ridiculous amount of money. So, and actually a lot of millionaires have come out and supported this and said, yes, please tax us more. They're very happy to pay that tax, but they want it to be done fairly. It shouldn't be done on the basis of philanthropy, because that's just ridiculous. Why should some people pay and others not? So that's what we would do. So there's definitely money to be found. And there's a lot of unnecessary things that this government seems intent to spend money on. Our county council, for example, wants to spend £70 million out of a £500 million budget on a 3-mile road, which improves journey times by 3 minutes. And that, I'm not even exaggerating. Everyone accepts this is the fact. So these are their priorities. £16 million out of a county council's budget could be spent on a lot of care. We could revolutionize care in the county. And yet that's their choice. It's a political choice. There are financial constraints, yes, but much of this is a political choice. It's about wrong priorities, about people putting their focus, their money, their attention, and their energy on the wrong things. If we look after social care, not only will it pay for itself many times over, but it will revolutionize people's lives. And ultimately, what is the point of a government if it's not helping people live happier and healthier lives? Okay. It's an absolute minimum that we should all be expecting of our government. I don't know. I've never heard of modern monetary theory, so I'm not going to try and talk about that. I'll just pass. But what I do know is the money's there. I've absolutely no doubt about that. It can be found. It's all about priorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're doing really well, but we've still got lots of hands up. So if I can ask you to just cut back slightly on, and if you've got something that you think's already been covered, then we'll try and whiz through the last few, because we have actually only got 10 minutes really, including wrapping up. So I'm going to take Steve, Usman, and then Sylvia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll be as quick as I can. I think that for me, I think everybody on this call has agreed and probably the majority of people in the country probably agree, what we need is a fully comprehensive health and social care system, free at the point of delivery, publicly owned, and I would only add to that, it must be democratically organised. But it's ends and means. I don't think we've got any means of getting that. How is this going to come about? I think the country needs a wake-up call, like a reality check, because people are already disillusioned that the democracy that we think we've got doesn't exist in this country. The House of Commons now, after the election, is not going to deliver the reforms that everybody seems to be agreed that we actually need. So what we're going to get is promises, broken promises, more broken promises. We're in some kind of cloud cuckoo land, because the central problem is in the political system itself. It can't deliver because all of the power is in His Majesty's Treasury and the Department of Health. And their face is set against any of the things that we want. And those bodies are wedded to a neoliberal financial priorities and a low-wage economy. And the problem is that the House of Commons is not a democracy, really. It's, if you like, a fantasy democracy. So we need, as a country, if we want to get the things we're all agreed on as reforms, we have to change the system of government and make it into a democratic one. And if we don't do that, we'll be sitting here in 5 years' time having exactly the same conversation. Then we'll be sitting here in 10 years' time and the conversation will be going on. So I think the wake-up call needs to be the country and us as people need to really get serious about the complete and utter failure of our democracy. And go back to John said, we'll be disillusioned. We could be disillusioned after the election. We're disillusioned now, and we will be disillusioned after the election. That's absolutely certain, and that's very dangerous in the way that John already said. The problem is means, not ends. We don't have the means to achieve what we want as a country. Thank you.
You, Steve. Usman, I'm just going to take Sean because he's got an electronic hand up and I haven't seen him. So if you want to come in, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, my question is, I represent people with learning disabilities, and that is support people with learning disabilities, how important they are, because we need support from advocacy organisations across the Northwest. They need to support people in different areas, Manchester, Greater Manchester, Liverpool, and Lancashire need support for ICBs, and to do support of the champions. Because I'm part of the champion as a leader.
Yeah.
And tell me about I'm listening to me champion. I can represent that to my group in our West groups. They need to think about important all the funding, pick up and send that to our part of the Northwest Training and Development Board. I will pass that over to the voice of people who's got the voice, people haven't got the voice, because that is about commitments to our working, powerful organisations. That is part of our leaders need to come in. Leaders is about to have opportunities to bring up the issues like health and social care and the rest of the board, and they need classify how as John mentioned earlier, Labour candidate, experts by experience needs how include this issue because I need to take this back to my group I represent. I'm done.
Thank you, Sean. Usman, if you can just briefly, I apologise, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'll try and make it quick. So I'm 32. I live with mental illness, neurodiversity, and hidden disabilities. I guess my points is that, you know, many of us, we feel very disillusioned with politics. The vilification of having hidden and non-hidden disabilities is absolutely rampant and disgusting in this society. Everybody, you know, kind of my age group, younger than me, older than me, wants to be an influencer, wants to be, you know, popular, a model. And I believe that that kind of society has been created by the Tories, by the capitalists, and it's all profit driven. If you are living with disabilities and you don't specifically fit a certain criteria for social care, it's really hard to get your needs met. And especially if you're from a culturally diverse community, you know, people feel shame for needing care. And I think some work needs to be done around culturally appropriate usage of wording, culturally appropriate care support needs being met, as well as neurodiverse needs being met. I think that the adult social care system is a very kind of blanket, one size fits all approach. And I don't think that's necessarily fit for purpose. I think we should be able to tailor and adapt care needs and support needs. But me personally, my own journey with mental illness, I'm a complex trauma survivor. I have long-term chronic medical conditions, which I hide well because I speak well. But I do suffer. I suffer on a daily basis, and it's very hard to live in a society that demonizes and vilifies me because of that and because of those additional barriers. And I think that what's increasing and driving substantially more social care, people accessing social care, is the fact that we don't have early intervention in the healthcare system, which is then making medical issues worse. I mean, I've certainly gotten worse with both my physical and mental health in the last 16 years. You know, particularly the last 10 years have been really brutal for me, and I continue to suffer. So I really want, you know, a party that will transform and restore people's faith, because at the moment, I don't have faith in any party. Greens align the most with my values, and I want to trust Labour, but Labour are moving more central, and that's the honest, you know, that's the honesty of it. I want to live in a world where it's equitable, everybody is supported, and their needs are met, so we can live in a more progressive, civilized society, as John McDonnell words. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman, and very well said. Sylvia, again, I'm going to have to ask you to be fairly quick.
Thank you. I agree with Pallavi's point that people should have free care at the point of use. But this should be extended to all aids and adaptations. They should all be free to maintain people at home and support carers. Is this in your party's manifesto? I particularly want to ask whether your parties include telecare in your manifesto. I think telecare is the equivalent of the 999 service. As in Leeds, we have mobile support workers who respond if people don't reply to their alarm going off in the response centre. I think the workers responding to that should be paid much better, and I think the telecare costs should be covered. I'm from Leeds, and our telecare costs for 2023-4 are starter package £9.30 a week. Falls package is £10.60 a week, and the highest, the GPS package, is £12.30 a week. I would love to hear your views on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. We're running out of time, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to ask everybody. Colin is showing up next on mine, and then Harriet, Larry, and Mike. We can manage a minute or
Right.
5 minutes between us.
Right, very quickly, I just want to challenge the idea that there has to be cross-party support. The lesson from 1948 was that a strong government with a strong majority, with a clear idea, a progressive idea that had broad public support, did the job and the rest then followed. So if it's sensible and if it will work, I think the Labour government can get on with it. And the idea that Charlie put forward of introducing the principle of need before resource into social care, we believe is that big idea that the front bench should hear and adopt as soon as possible.
Thank you, Colin. Harriet, I think we are next.
Oh, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say I'm so grateful to everybody for their really brilliant ideas, but there are just a couple of things I want to say. I thought about it a lot, and I think that disabled people and people who need care have absolutely no status and no power at all. So there's got to be a sort of redistribution of power somehow. And I think if people want to bring in radical changes, they've got to involve us. You've got to mobilize these guys down at the grass level. And the other thing is, what do the speakers think about this idea of removing social care from council control altogether? Because I saw a meeting with Jeremy Hunt and some big shots from the care organizations, and that was their idea, that in order for anything to work, you had to take social care and social services out of the clutch of local government. And it seemed to me maybe it's not a bad idea. So, you know, it's the power structure that's the trouble. And I think present social services are a disaster and ought to be completely revolutionized. We should do away with it and put in something else. I know that's not going to be easy, but anyway, I wondered what people thought about the division of labor, as it were. You know, can you separate social care from the way it's organized at the moment?
Thank you. Can I have Larry and then Mike?
Hi. As a Green Party person, I'm very pleased with the manifesto. The 20 billion pounds a year actually means you could do away with charges, and it means you could pay the 15 pounds an hour minimum wage. But I have to add a caveat. We talk about social personal care as the Lib Dems do. Personal care is not social care. It is very limited. It is eating, toileting, dressing, washing, the kind of things that disabled people have been fighting for decades now. It's the wrong direction. When I came here to go on to an ISIS idea, when I came here as an American, I was delighted with the NHS. And I thought to myself, this is not just an efficient way to run a service. It is a way in which people in the country say to each other, in your hour of need, we are with you. And that is so powerful and so important. And if we lose that, the kind of things that people have been talking about, the disillusion of people with this kind of crummy government we've had, things will get very, very bad. We can get back to that point where the British people said that to each other, or we will go in a very different direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. Now, Mike, and I would like to do a bit of, I've got to go, I would like to go to John.
I've removed most of what I was planning to say in the interest of brevity, but I would say that the few speakers and many of the speakers have really raised some important points with regard to the way services need to be designed by the people who have them, and that has to be at the forefront of things. Also, Usman very clearly raised the demonization of people with disabilities. And we have to really take that and address it hard. There's been an absolute attack by the Tories in recent time, but John, as you know, Labour's not above doing it either. So we need to be very clear on that. The one question that I'm leaving everybody with, which hasn't really been raised, strangely, is the whole question of the workforce, the migrant workforce. Because indeed, Pallavi, the well more than 100,000, the 165,000 or more vacancies that cannot be filled in the home care sector. And it has been, you know, the only way has been for people from other countries to come. And we should welcome that. We should absolutely welcome that. But what has happened is that they've been brought in after having paid sums to unscrupulous agencies, who then do not deliver what they promise in terms of jobs or wages or conditions, charge them extortionate rates for food and accommodation, and then hand them over to the Home Office. The Home Office, the state, the Crown is actually, you know, engaging in a mafia act. This has to stop, and we have to really highlight it.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for raising that point, because it's just atrocious what is going on with that. Right, John, would you like to?
Right, very quick run through, because I know you're short of time now. With regard to Steve's point about the failure of democracy in this country, I think there are reforms that need to take place, I have to say, and I'm for support of proportional representation, but that's a sort of systemic reform that's needed. The reality is this, and I convened a meeting of a whole range of disability groups in Parliament 2 months ago, working with DPAC in particular. The only way we're going to get change, it will not come through Parliament itself or alone, or governments alone. We have to look on what has forced change in this country and other countries overall, and it is mobilization across the whole community. We've got to see this almost like a civil rights movement that we're bringing about at the moment, the right to social care, and mobilize on that basis. What impressed me are, you know, all the massive young people that were marching, both in, you know, Black Lives Matter, what's happened with regard to Gaza and all the rest, people coming out and mobilizing on a huge scale. One of the things we need to do is talk to other organizations now to recognize this is a civil rights movement, and that's the only way that we can mobilize on a scale to get the change that we need. On Sean's point, and it needs champions, as he said, people, leaders who are able to go out there and advocate, but those champions need proper support, and organizations need proper support and financing from the state as well. And campaigns like this should be properly funded. When I was the chair of finance on the GRC, we funded a whole range of organizations, individual campaigns as well. Sometimes they were campaigning against us, but we thought it was important that people had a democratic resource to be able to wage those sorts of campaigns. And I think that's where change will come from. But I do think, I don't think I'm being over optimistic. I do think there's a feeling of a need for change in this country. That's what we'll see at the general election. But I particularly feel that people realize that there's a whole range of public services that are completely broken and need restoring. But in social care, I think there's a huge expanse of people and support out there for dramatic change, radical change. And if we can mobilize that support, we'll get it. The point that Colin made about you don't need cross-party support. Well, I agree. That's exactly what the Hatley government did. It steamed ahead, won the argument, etc. And that's what we were trying to do in the 17 and 19 elections with a radical manifesto. Unfortunately, things have changed a bit since then, particularly within the Labour Party. And I actually think, to be realistic, we need to gain as much cross-party support as possible, because what I don't want to see is one government introduce a system that we all support, and then the next one comes in and cuts it or undermines it. And I agree, the strength of argument is important there, but also the strength of building alliances is absolutely key. With regard to Usman, can I just say, on the issue, I just want to raise one issue with you, Usman, on the issue of neurodiversity in particular. 5 years ago, and we reproduced it only last year, a group of us brought together a neurodiversity manifesto. And if you give your contact details to the organisers, we'll send Jackie and I will send you a copy of that. It'd be worth linking up with the neurodiversity group that brought that together, because actually I thought it was a huge breakthrough in the recognition of the range of non-visible issues and challenges that people face. And it brought forward a program of work that I think that could catch the wind and transform people's lives. Sylvia, there isn't any detail in the Labour manifesto about the funding of aid and adaptations or telecare, etc. It doesn't go into that level of detail, but my view is I want to see the end of means testing, not just for benefits, but also for AIDS adaptations and other support services. And technology is developing so fast now to support people. We've got to be ahead of the game to be able to ensure that people access that, and also that they invest in it too as well. Harriet made the point about disabled people having no status or power or redistribution of power. I actually do think we've got power. But we've got to seize power to do that. We've got to recognize our own power, and that's how social movements come together and can succeed. And as I say, I think this is a civil liberties, a civil rights issue that my own view, I think we could mobilize on a mass scale. With regard to how then you develop structures, the reason some Conservatives are arguing taking social care out of democratic local authority control is because actually they want to then whole-scale privatise social care and actually have some privatisation of the NHS as well. What we've got to do is argue for democratic control at the local level. That will be, I think, both in terms of local authorities and health, but also there are innovative ways in which we can bring democracy to this. Citizens' juries, citizens' assemblies, those sorts of things we should be arguing for as well. I agree with Larry about the personal care issue. We've got to really demonstrate the range of services that people need, and again it comes back then to actually ensuring that those services are designed by the people who need them and who rely upon them best. With regard to the workforce, what I find offensive is the way in which workers are invited to work here. They're then from abroad, and in my local homes, they were largely Filipinos or often Polish as well. They were then employed on low wages. The visas to bring their families with them were then blocked, so they were treated, exploited almost in a modern form of slavery. That's why having sectoral collective bargaining overcomes that, because you're not just negotiating on pay, you're negotiating on conditions of work as well, and employment rights. Final point from me, Mike raised the point. We need to emphasize to people the scale of abuse that's going on at the moment, the language that's used about anyone who's on benefits at the moment or welfare dependent is scandalous, and that's producing physical attacks on people with disability, visible physical disabilities. And it's almost like stepping back in time, to be honest, at the moment, the atmosphere that there is out there. And again, that we need to ensure that we bring that to the fore and that we defend people. We not just defend them, actually, we articulate the value of everyone.
Fabulous, thank you, John. And I apologise to everybody for running over, but you appear to be sticking with us, so we will be closing very shortly. Pallavi, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think, I'll just pick up a few things. The Green Party manifesto also doesn't talk about free personal aids, but I think there is money in there to provide for that. So I'm confident that we should be able to provide for that. And telecare is a brilliant idea. So yeah, we should definitely be using all the technology that we have to try and help people live independently and well A point has been made very powerfully about the demonization of people with disabilities, both visible and invisible. And I completely see where that's come from. And I think, you know, some of the solution will be in just making disability more visible and normal. If we can all talk about it and treat it as, because, you know, the number of disabled people is huge. I think I read one paper where they said 1 in 3 people had some form of disability. So it's not as if it's a tiny minority. There's a huge number of us. So if we talk about it and openly demand changes that enable disabled people to play a full part in society, I think we will go a long way. This needs to be a part of our conversation in every sphere of society. And public transport is a pet, you know, hate love of mine. It's just the lack of it, the lack of disabled access to public transport drives me bonkers. So we need to have these conversations. The power structure, should social care be removed from councils? It's an interesting idea, but I actually think the problem is more about governance and accountability, not so much where the power lies. I'm not convinced that a bad government in the center will do a better job of, you know, of providing for better social care. I think it's the point about democracy comes out again. Yes, democracy is sorely lacking, and it is the lack of proportional representation, the lack of accountability of our leaders, I think, is to blame in large part for the disillusionment that people have with politics and politicians. The sort of corruption that we've seen in the past few years and the complete lack of any comeback, any penalty for actions that were done in plain daylight was horrendous. I think the only way to combat that is, first of all, we need to use our votes. We absolutely need to vote for individuals who are definitely going to, you know, show some integrity when in power. And we need to vote for parties which have policies that will take us furthest in the direction we need to go to. We mustn't underestimate the value of the vote. We get that opportunity only once in 5 years. We must use it properly. Because as long as we keep going for tactical voting and voting for one of the 2 big parties, we will end up with, you know, as we have done, we've ended up with a shift to the right, where the main politicians are more and more afraid to talk about care for all, about health for all, and about, you know, just things that we've taken for granted for so many years. So I would plead with people to actually use their votes as well. I think it's really important. We do need to change our structures so they become better and more flexible and accountable to us. I really liked what Larry said about, you know, being with you in your hour of need. I think that's such a powerful statement, and it really captures perfectly where we need to get to again. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. But thank you all. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much to both of you, Pallavi and John. It's just been an incredible meet as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure the rest of our steering group. It's been an incredible meeting. Thank you for all your questions, all your contributions. But we do know that this struggle is really going to kick off in earnest after the election. And we need to be building a huge alliance and grassroots movement. So please do come and join us. If you've left your details in the chat, then you'll be added to our mailing list. I'm sorry if we didn't quite manage to get through everybody, but I think it's been very valuable for what we've got. I believe there's lots of things being shared in the chat as well. You can find anything else on endsocialcaredisgrace.org. If you can follow our social media, which is End Social Care Disgrace across all channels, I think, apart from Twitter. That would be very helpful. And just as a final thing, members of our steering group are joining DPAC on the 18th of July in outside Parliament to take action on disabled people's demands. It will also be available on live feeds throughout the day on social media. And that just leaves me to say thank you all. And please keep in touch. and come and join us.